Shalom, everyone. I pray that you had or will have or are having a great Thanksgiving. You know, this is the one time we're, of course, entering into the month that it's one of those bittersweet months, I think, for many of us. I enjoy Hanukkah. Hanukkah is one of my, I know that it's not as scriptural as far as Leviticus chapter 23, but I feel like it's a very, very scriptural festival, especially this year. The Festival of Dedication is one that we should all be looking at and considering our own dedication during this time. But, we have at the same time, Grandma got run over by a reindeer and all the other things that are going to be at your favorite box store. We can't disconnect from this time. It's one that we have to live through. And maybe, once again, our attitude, and I have to talk to myself on that one, our attitude might make the difference in all of it. So with that, we have Thanksgiving, which is a time that, I think it goes back to the Pilgrims. I think it goes back to Sukkot, and it was a group of people that were not just desiring religious liberty, but were breaking free of some of the traditions of man in that day. The Pilgrims were probably a group that most of us would get along with very, very well. And so it's a time that we can come together and put some of the differences. I know that Thanksgiving this year is probably going to be, for many people, a very difficult time. It's going to be a time that there may be separation from families, a lot of different things. But then there'll be those other families that Thanksgiving will turn into a political discussion and a political argument. I pray that didn't happen at your table. So with that, I want to go back to last week. Had a couple of discussions regarding something that is this digging of the wells. This verse of Isaac went and he unstopped the wells of Abraham. This is a verse that actually goes back with me to in the 1980s, late 1980s, when Kathy and I were part of an Assembly of God church in Tucson, Arizona. And we had a pastor there, Jim Brankel, of blessed memory. Jim taught me many things. He taught me some things that I needed to know and some things that I didn't need to know, but along the way, both of them end up working to our good. And I remember just a few sermons that Pastor Brankel taught. One of them was about unstopping the wells of Abraham. So it's a favorite place, kind of a reminiscent place for me to go back to Scripture. And this is the place that I was discussing this with Kathy, with some other folks this past Shabbat, that he came to a place that he dug another well, and this is in chapter 26 of Bereshit. He dug another well, and there was no longer quarreling, and so he called it Rekovot, or open wide spaces, because now Adonai has made room for us, and we will be productive in the land. There's something I kind of briefly touched on, but I want to go back to. That when you dig your own well, remember that I talked about last week that under the land of Israel is an aquifer. That aquifer is literally one body of water. But you can go other places and you can get other springs of bitter water, of sulfur, of water that's undrinkable. Make sure that when you dig your own well, you're tapping into the same aquifer of our father Abraham. When Isaac dug his own well, it had to be water that matched up with his father Abraham. And the same thing should hold true for us. Many people today dig wells and tap into to bitter waters. dig wells and tap into brackish water, which is a mixture of salt and fresh. They dig into wells and find all kinds of other things, and it's called tradition. It's called man's religion, and that is not the same. So the water that we drink today needs to have the same flavor as the water that Abraham drank in that day, and that water would be the living water of Messiah. So we continue on into this Torah portion, and I have to tell you, there are Torah portions along the way that are, they're favorites of mine. I love Bereshit chapter 1, 2, 3. The story of Yosef is a favorite place. There's various others, I could go on and on. Then there's Torah portions that it's like, I just would just as soon kind of get through that one. And this is one of the Torah portions that I'm talking about, because though there are some things that are very intriguing to me, the whole story of Laban, which I talked about a couple weeks ago, that Laban, though his name means white, he is a false purity, a false holiness. He is basically deception. And maybe that's the key to why I really don't like going into the story of Laban, is because I see so many people today that walk in deception. And when it's like a song that Barry Phillips wrote many years ago, of "Find the Stones," and the verse that the statement that he made in the song was, "It's hard to see when you close your eyes." And deception is something that, for me, when I look at somebody and I know that they're walking in deception, it just does something to me inside. There is I would hope and pray, kind of a righteous anger. Sometimes it's righteous, sometimes it's not. But I would hope that it would be more of a righteous anger that rises up inside of me. I go to Walmart and see the same things that you do. I get angry, but for a different reason, because I see it's like going to going to a box store during the time of Halloween, or seeing people that there's you see that they're following what they've been taught, but what they've been taught is so wrong. And they're quote unquote good people, but they're good deceived people. And when you start to try to talk to them, there's just nothing to deal with there. That does something to me. I guess it's kind of part of that shepherd thing that I've got going on, but it just does something to me inside. So when we talk about Laban, he's not really my favorite subject, but we're going to get there in a few moments. Before we get there, though, is in chapter 28 and verse 10. Yaakov went out from Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. Now, he would have been going in the reverse of the exact steps, within reason, okay, but pretty much the exact route that Abraham came into the land. He is going to retrace those steps in leaving the land. And so when it says that he traveled from Beersheba, he went to Haran and came to a certain place and stayed the night there because the sun had set. He took a stone from the place, put it under his head, and laid down there to sleep. So where is this certain place? It wasn't just he came to any old place. He came to some place. He came to somewhere. But he came to a certain place, and he took a stone and he put it under his head and lay there and went to sleep. Now, run with this with me for just a moment. If Abraham took Isaac and possibly Esau, or not Esau, but Abraham took Isaac and Ishmael to the mountain every year for a sacrifice during the time which would later be called Passover, a dedication of the covenant, then Abraham would have told his grandson Jacob, he would have told the story, Isaac's got the story, he was there, and then Isaac ends up telling the story to Jacob. And so what's the possibility that Isaac is continuing on with the tradition of going every year to the same mountain to celebrate what would later be called Passover, and he took Jacob and Esau with him? I mean, to me, that's kind of like, it just is pretty much obvious. You don't have to put on your Captain Obvious cape to come up with something like that. But to me, it seems very plausible. And so when at some point in time, let's kind of backtrack. So Isaac starts telling Jacob, who is very covenant oriented, about when Abraham took him to this place and the sacrifice and the ram and all that. I mean, wouldn't Jacob have said, "But Dad, take me"? I mean, again, it's just, to me, is so far-fetched that he would have never been there. So he probably had been taken there many, many times, and Isaac had shown him the rock that he had been placed on, the altar rock. And so Jacob takes this rock and he puts his head down upon that same rock and he goes to sleep. Why? Because the faith of Abraham has been passed on to Isaac and is now being passed on to Jacob. So Jacob is resting in the faith of his grandfather as he puts his head upon that rock. And you know the story of what's going to happen, the ladder and all of those things. And this is what has been called a portal into the heavenly realm. That's not a mystical statement. That's not, I mean, movies have been done and all kinds of books have been written and there's been so much counterfeit about things, but counterfeit is exactly what it says. It's a counterfeit. So in order for there to be a counterfeit, there must be a reality. So are there places, or is there a place upon this earth that acts as a portal between the spiritual realm and the physical realm? And that place is Jerusalem, and specifically is the Temple Mount. That's kind of where I go. So he goes there and he is given this promise, and it's in verse 14, your descendants will be as numerous as the grains of dust on the earth. The first time that this word dust, it is the word afar. To go into, I wasn't planning on doing that this year, but there's just kind of words that jump out at me on this time through the Torah. The word is afar, which is Ayin, Pei, and Resh. Ayin is the eye, the Pei is like a mouth, and the Resh is the head. So it is, this word dust, afar, is about the seeing and breath of the head. Which, by the way, when we go back to Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 2, verse 7, and it says that Yah formed Adam and Hava out of the dust, the afar of the earth, and then he breathed, he saw the dust, and then he breathed the breath into the dust. Okay, we got the same thing happening. So the dust, when he says, your generations shall be like the dust of the earth, will be like your past, your descendants are going to be of like kind as you. Now, this word continues on. I'm going to let you I could have gone a little bit farther with that one probably, but I'll let you play with it on your own. This goes over to a verse that is very, very, one of my favorite verses. And that's in Psalm 102, verse 14 or 15, depending on your translation, the numbering. For your servants love her very stone. I got to go back up to a couple verses. But you, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, are enthroned forever. Your renown will endure through all generations. You arise and take pity on Zion, for the time has come to have mercy on her. The time determined has come. I cannot think of a greater prayer for right now in this day. The time has come for you to show mercy to Zion. For your servants love her very stones and take pity or bow down in kindness. The word is kanan. They take pity on her very dust. The word is that your servants love her very stones. So the story of Rav Kook. Rav Kook, when he would get off the boat in Haifa, in his first trips to the land, he got off the boat in Haifa, and he refused to, as some did and some still do, to bow down and kiss the dirt. Instead, he would kiss the stones. And someone asked him, why do you do that? And he said, well, the dirt can give back to me. The dirt, I can plant something in the dirt, and the dirt can give back to me in the form of fruit, but a stone has nothing it can give back. And so I want to give in such a way that I am expecting nothing in return. That's an amazing love for the land. It says that your servant takes pity or bends or stoops in kindness to the dust. What is dust? What is dust in your house? Okay, I mean, we all got dust in our house somewhere, right? No matter if you got a really great housekeeper, somewhere there's a little bit of dust. Dust remains. It's like, when our dog gets in the middle of the floor and shakes, there's dust that comes out all over the place. So part of what's, on the top of the TV remains of my dog. Or remains of me, or whoever else. Anybody that's ever come and visited our house has left some dust. In Jerusalem, the dust is about our generations. The generations that have been. And when you go to Jerusalem, you add to the generations of dust. Okay, again, I'm going to let you kind of take that one and roll with it for a little while on your own. Just a kind of a fascinating one to me, but I think a little strange, so that's the way it is. Verse 15 says, for look, I am with you. I will guard you wherever you go. I will bring you back into this land, because I won't leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. There must have been a question. Okay, Abraham, again, these stories are passing on generation to generation. Let's don't just disconnect everything along the way. Anyone that, my grandfather I'm so thankful. In the day that I grew up, we had television, yes, but the only time it was ever turned on was to see what Walter Cronkite was saying and to see what the weather was. I can't remember the television in my grandmother and grandfather's house really ever being turned on outside of that time. There were no cell phones. There was no video games. You know what we did? We sat and I listened to stories. I listened to the stories that my grandfather told about fishing and hunting, about deer that he shot through through his time, and that's a marvelous thing. In that day that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes, the 12 boys, the generations were passing on. How many times was the account of Noah recounted around another fire? You know, when you were Abraham, you remembered the son of Noah telling you stories around a fire at night. It wasn't a campfire, they weren't camping, it was just their typical fire. And the accounts were being given generation to generation. So when the time came for Jacob to be exiled from the land, he was questioning, should I actually do this? Should I follow in my grandfather's steps of leaving the land as he did when there was a famine and he went to Egypt, though I'm going back to Haran? Or should I stand as my father did and be fruitful and have a harvest of 100-fold? What should I do? So the Almighty comes to him and says, no, this is in my plan. Why? Because there's a Laban that you need to meet. Going back to Haran is not just about him finding Rachel and Leah. Going back to Haran is about him confronting a Laban. Because though I believe the church system has taught Jacob in a very deceptive manner, the whole thing of supplanting and the stealing of the birthright and those things, there is an aspect of deception that is in Jacob. There is a willingness to go along with the deception and with the deceit. And so Jacob needs to go and in a way come face to face with himself. It's an interesting thing to me in life that as a pastor, as you know, sitting counseling with people and hearing all kinds of things that have happened in their lives, it's kind of interesting when someone says, I met somebody the other day and I just really don't like them. I mean, right from this, I don't know what it was about the person, but as soon as I met him, I just didn't like him. You know why? Because you were being brought to your own mirror. Normally, I won't say normally, but I could say many times, we're brought face to face with people so we can be brought face to face with ourselves. Think about it. Think about it. The problem is that instead of when we're brought face to face with ourselves, we displace the anger. The anger goes somewhere else instead of going internally in order to deal with the issue that's at hand. Now, he says in verse 20, Yaakov took this vow, and David Stern translates it, if Elohim will be with me and guard me on this road when I'm traveling, goes on from there. The word if is not in the text. The word, if you go back, and you can do this just by going to Blue Letter Bible or wherever you use, it says Elohim Shamar will be with me and will guard me on this road that I am traveling, giving me bread to eat and clothes to wear. Elohim Shamar. Elohim will guard me. There was not really a question in his mind at this time. The faith of Abraham and the faith of Isaac was in the process of being passed on to Jacob and his life. So this is not a question of that if I leave here and make it back and okay, then. No, it's more of a statement of, I know that this is where I'm supposed to go. I know this is what I'm supposed to do, and I believe, based upon the revelation that I have at the moment, the revelation that was given to me by my grandfather, by my father, and this little vision that I've also had regarding the ladder and stuff. He says, I just have a real good, firm feeling that this is actually of the Creator. But then he does say something that I want to bring out in verse 21. So that I return to my father's house in shalom and peace, then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will be my Elohim. The Hebrew says, then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim. I think that the connotation that David Stern brought out here in this verse of, then Adonai will be my Elohim. So it is a transition of faith. It's that crisis of faith. I've taught on this in the past. I'm not going to go there today. But it's a crisis of faith that each one of our children must come face to face with. This generation, I guess I am going there a little bit, the generation of the helicopter pilot, or the helicopter pilot, they need them, helicopter parents. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's basically this hovering that, parents are doing, hovering over their children at all times, unable to let them go out of their sight, that everything must be under control and everything must be supervised, to the point that our children are never allowed to be in a situation in which they can start to discern that voice. Good friend of mine the other day had, and I won't go into any of the details of this, but had a situation arise in their child's life in which it was a rough situation. In fact, it was a very difficult situation, one that is still kind of being played out. But the fruit of that situation, it appears, is worth the hurt of the situation. Because the fruit is the crisis of faith that is happening. So Jacob says, when I leave here and I see that he has given me bread to eat and clothes to wear, then he's going to be bringing me back here, and I'm going to have a tenth. I'm going to give him a tenth of all that I have. Now, at first he says, he's just going to give me bread to eat and clothes to wear, but I have this funny feeling that when I come back here, I'm going to have more than I'm leaving with. So whatever I get back here with, I will do like my father Abraham, and I will give a tenth. He was acknowledging the Melchizedek priesthood of his family. Again, I don't have time to go into all that. Chapter 29. Now, I'll let you go through and you can read this about the well. Here we've got we're going to have another barren woman at a well. Surprise, surprise. But, here is Jacob. He gets to the well. The story is of the family that's there. He finds Rebecca, kisses her. It's a little early for the first kiss, but, it is what it is. And then they're talking about he says, and this is in verse 7, he said, look, there's still plenty of daylight. It isn't time to bring the animals home, so water the sheep, then go and put them out to pasture. They answered, we can't, not until all the flocks have been gathered together. All the flocks need to be gathered together before the stone is rolled away from the entrance of the well, and they're able to go to receive the water from this well. Is there something being spoken to us today? Is it possible that the events of the world, the events that are happening around us, are not about the events that are happening around us? I go back to a statement I made that if you believe that what is happening, you don't know what's happening. And that's the truth. If you believe that you're watching the television and you're looking at your favorite news sites and your favorite videos and all of these other things, and you believe that's what's happening, that ain't what's happening. There's something else happening. And it's in this verse. He's gathering his sheep. That's what's happening. And it will not be, they talk about this great outpouring. Okay, well, that's been talked about for a few millennium now, whereas it does not appear that there is a great outpouring until there is a remnant brought forth. And that remnant, to bring in the words of Yeshua out of John chapter 17, that they would be one, is talking about that which is being brought forth here in this Torah portion, which is the 12 tribes, that they were never one to begin with. The 12 tribes, our forefathers, brought forth from our foremothers, and yes, we had foremothers, is a, could we say, slightly dysfunctional family that from about the time of the sandbox on, these boys were literally at each other's throats, to the point of, we will read it in, I think, next Torah portion, wanting to kill one of their brothers. Yeah, it's a half-brother, okay, but still, still got some bloodline going on there. You probably shouldn't treat your sibling like that. So we have this dysfunctional family. So the prayer of Yeshua is actually going all the way back. That prayer that they may be one goes all the way back to this Torah portion, to a family of 12 young men who have never been one. And we see a transition that's going to happen in this Torah portion. That the Almighty will begin to work not through an individual, but through a family. Up until now, it's been Adam, it was Noah, it was Shem, we see Peleg, we see Eber, we see Enoch, on and on. Abram, who is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He is working in this earth up until this point through an individual, but will now begin to work through a family. If we look at this in a renewed covenant, quote unquote, New Testament concept, Paul uses the words body of Messiah many times, but remember that Paul is speaking to a group that is predominantly Greek-oriented. And so he is using terminology that they would understand. As these new followers of Yeshua are coming into covenant, they probably had not read Bereshit, Genesis. They didn't, they probably didn't even know what Bereshit was any more than some of you did or I did a few years ago. It was like Berahu. Oh, it was Genesis. Okay, I got that. So Paul has to deal with them and speak with them in terminology that they will understand. That terminology should not change. Let me go back and try that one again. The terminology he used should now, as we are today being called to go back to the ancient paths, back to the dust, if you would term it that way, maybe we could look at it as this, that what he was speaking at is the body of Messiah, we could now bring back and consider it as the family, the covenant family in Messiah. We all know what it's like to be part of a family. Many of us know what it's like to be part of a dysfunctional family. Okay? We got that, right? But here we have the Almighty is going to begin to work through a family on this earth that is going to be individual people that are going to be different. Hey, Reuben and Simeon and Asher and Issachar, these are different individuals. I grew up as an only child. Okay, that's my excuse in life. I'm an only child. My wife, part of a family of 6. I've met them. Actually, one of her brothers died as a teenager, but I've met the others. There's some similarities, but in the end, they're different. Some of them are real different. Yeah, I'll pay for that one. But they're different. I've been around other families that, there's a number of children. They're all different. Our grandchildren, they're all different. And the worst thing that I could do is to try to make them all the same. So why don't we take that concept into the family of covenant and consider that we're all different? Yeah, again, some of us are real different. That peculiar verse? There's a few I've met that have taken that like to an extreme. I'm not quite talking about that group. But we need to celebrate our differences, not argue over our differences. Celebrate that we are different, but our focus should be the same. And see, this is what will happen in the end when all of the sheep, all of the family is gathered, we will have different colored sheep. We will have different heights of sheep, different widths of sheep. There will be, different aspects. A shepherd can tell all of his sheep apart. They don't all look the same like they do to you and I. But we will all gather for one thing, and that is to drink of the water of the well. Will the outpouring happen? Or will the outpouring not happen until we figure out how to all gather at the same well and accept each other as part of the same family? Or just kind of continue to isolate? I know people that most of you know, Hanok Young is one of my closest friends. He's a dear brother. I have caught so much flack. We have different outlooks on Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, but you know something? He's still my brother. And our differences don't cause us to isolate from one another. I've learned a lot. I mean, a lot with like a few exclamation marks behind it from Hanok Young. And I pray that somewhere along the way he's learned something from me. We're not the same. Our goal is the same. But I know people that will not associate with Hanok because he doesn't believe like them. And wow, mystery of mysteries. There's people on the Jewish side of this family that won't associate with me because I don't believe like them. And I would like to say that our beliefs are probably much closer than any of us actually know if we ever sat down and began to talk about it. Or just remain on your own side of the pasture. Yeah, watch for wolves. Okay. Dysfunctional family, yes. You know, here's the mystery of the ages. This is going to be one of the most spectacular things that's going to happen. Is the way that I read the book, the most dysfunctional, and read through this thing. You got the mandrakes, and that's not male ducks. You got it's a comedy act, folks. It's literally, if you can get through this and not laugh at some point, okay, it's amazing that no one has done a movie about this and put it to comedy. Maybe I could figure out somebody to work with on that one. It would be absolutely over the top hilarious. But the most dysfunctional family that has ever lived, I think, on planet Earth, will one day be the standard of righteousness for the whole earth. I mean, what's the irony of that one, right? Okay, I got to move on. Chapter 31, in verse 13. Yeah, get off of that. Verse 13. He's told to return. He's told, I am the Elohim of Beit El, where you are anointed a standing stone with oil. There you vowed to me. Now get up out of this land and return to the land you were born. And he takes Leah, he takes Rachel, he takes all the children are in tow here along the way, and he begins to go back. But then there's one thing that happens. Laban is still in the picture. And Laban remains in the picture because of one thing that happened that I don't believe that Jacob knew anything about. In verse 30, granted that you had to leave because you long so deeply for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Laban believes because a man that's deceived will deceive himself. Okay, get that. A man that's deceived, self-deception is the greatest deception because it's the most difficult thing to get out of. It takes admitting you were wrong. Laban has deceived for 21 years now or so, and he believes he's right. But he's willing to, in the end, he's gotten a few things out of the deal, but he sees this is over. I've got to let this go. I'll move on to deceiving someone else, I guess. But then he notices that his household gods. So see, Laban is, if Abraham's father, Haran, was a maker of gods, then Laban has walked in his footsteps and is not interested in the footsteps of Abraham. He's interested in the blessings of Abraham. The nose rings, stuff like that. You know, he's interested in the blessings, but I don't want the responsibility of that covenant. I just as soon have my little gods that I can control and don't ask me to do anything, instead of one that expects me to have responsibilities toward him. So, Jacob speaks these words, and he says, because I was afraid and said, suppose you had daughters, take me by force, going on and on. So, with our kinsmen, Yaakov did not know who, I was trying to find the person, but yeah, here's verse 32. But if you find your gods with someone, that person will not remain alive. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no way for me to say this any plainer. Watch your mouth. What happened? What happened here when Jacob spoke these words? The person that has those gods will certainly not remain alive, will be put to death. Who was it that died along the way? The one who had stolen her father's gods. Now, the question that I ask along the way is this: why did she feel the necessity of taking those household gods? Because maybe I'm just speculating here. I don't want to sound judgmental. She wasn't quite trusting yet in this man. Though he was showing affection and love toward her, maybe she was looking at him through the eyes of the way she had looked at her father. You know, the way that we grow up is hard to get over sometimes. It's actually hard to get over all the time. And she saw her husband, her father, as a person of deception, and she portrayed that over onto her husband. And because of that, she had plan B. The greatest thing you can do in life today is get rid of your plan B. We should only have a plan A, and that is that we follow him and him alone. Shavua Tov. Have a blessed, prosperous week. Bezrat Hashem. God willing, see you again next week. And got any turkey left? Well, might as well have a turkey sandwich. Pretty good tradition. Till next week, be strong.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmarecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom.